Well, hey, welcome to our Sunday evening Bible fellowship on March 22nd, 2020. I'm just looking forward to continuing our series on Genesis. And last week, as we looked at Jacob's life, he had pulled a slick one, if you recall. And as we meet up this week, we want to get into Genesis 29. And Brother Nathan and I will just dialogue about this a little bit. We hope that you'll just lock in and focus for this next little while. And there's some discussion questions at the bottom. I encourage you to, of course, pray. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few moments. But as far as Genesis chapter 29, it's to really understand what Jacob is going through here. He's actually experiencing blessings in his life after this trickery. And Nathan, I know we've talked a little bit about just blessings of hard work. I think that's where Jacob was at this point.
Yes.
What would be some times in your life where you have experienced just the blessings of hard work?
Sure. The first thing that comes to my mind has to be when I was just a little boy out working with my dad, out mowing the lawn, and making that final pass with that lawnmower and getting to look back and see this entire lawn that I had worked so hard, just getting to see the immediate results of that. And sure, maybe I missed a couple little spots there as a little boy, but just getting to see that fresh cut grass and that I had done that, my hands, my back had done that work. That was pretty rewarding.
Yeah. No, that's, and I think most boys checking in can identify with that phenomenon. Sure. That's just a good nuts and bolts experience as a young adult, or young person. In Genesis chapter 29, Jacob has fled his house because Esau wants to kill him, and in his mind he is okay because he's encountered God in Genesis chapter 28. He sees a ladder going up to heaven, angels descending and ascending. God appears to him, and he deepens his faith. It's like everything's past now. It's almost as if it's forgotten as far as this trickery over his brother Esau. So we pick up in Genesis chapter 29, verses 1 and 2, and notice what the text says. Then Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. It's an interesting phrase when you look at Jacob went on his journey. The Hebrew literally means he picked up his feet. There's kind of an enthusiasm. He's riding a cloud right now and just clicking along. And in verse 2 it says, "And he looked, and behold, a well in the field, and lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they watered the flocks, and a great stone was upon the well's mouth. And thither were all the flocks gathered, and they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in his place." And so this is really describing the custom behind this. It's not necessarily happening because we're going to find that Jacob is jumping in there and taking care of that here in just a moment. But you read in verse 4, "And Jacob said unto them, My brethren, whence be ye? And they said, Of Haran are we. And he said unto them, Know ye Laban, the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And he said unto them, Is he well? And they said, He is well, and behold, Rachel his daughter cometh with the sheep. And he said, Lo, it is yet high day, neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together. Water ye the sheep, and go and feed them. And they said, We cannot, until all the flocks be gathered together, until they roll the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. You see Jacob enjoying God's blessings here, Nathan. And as I just look at really what's going on here, I picture Jacob. He's coming in, his chest is out a little bit. He's feeling good about life. God met with him, gave his stamp of approval, saying you're going in a good direction. He's gone where his mama sent him. He's with the people of the east. It's been a several 100-mile journey. And then he realizes that, okay, this is where my uncle is. He asked about Laban, and sure enough, Laban's here, and then they introduce Rachel. And you find later in this passage that Laban was very beautiful to look upon. And evidently at this point, Jacob is probably fairly smitten, as we're going to see in the following verses and some of the heroics he puts on. And you pick up in verse 9 and notice what takes place here. While he yet spake with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And so you just see this male ego kick in a little bit, Nathan. It's like, okay, here's a good-looking girl looking my way. I got to show what I can do here. All these lazy shepherds are over here on the side. They're not motivated, and they're kind of using excuses to procrastinate. And so I'm going to rush in here, and I'm going to show what I'm made of. I mean, it's the guy. It almost makes me think of that third-grade little leaguer. I mean, a cute girl walks in, and so he's going to really show up there and show how macho he is. And that's what Jacob is doing here. And he's really trying to make a good impression. Now, if you were to stop right here, there's really nothing going on that's spiritual. I mean, if you want to get blunt, it's really fleshly and emotionally driven. So he met with God at the end of chapter 28, but really when you come down here to verses 10 and 11, this is really just all physical. But notice how he responds in verse 11 and continues to act. Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. Now, obviously, that would be awkward in our culture, but in this culture, it wasn't. That was going up and just offering a greeting. And it continues on in verse 12 when it says, and Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told her father. And it came to pass when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob his sister's son, that he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And he told Laban all these things. And Laban said unto him, surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. Again, he's riding cloud nine. Mm-hmm. Everything's great. And not only has he made it to his uncle's town, there's now a good-looking woman in his life. And he's already thinking, I wonder if this is the one. I mean, there's almost maybe a reminiscing as far as how I remember how my daddy Isaac met my mama in that big long journey, that servant that went in a distant land. And I'm almost thinking, is this going to be a repeat of history? Everything's just going great at this point. And it makes me think, Nathan, have you ever experienced a time in your life where everything was just clicking along for you? I mean, I thought a little bit about in my life, but I mean, how about you? Have you experienced maybe a specific season?
Yeah, and I think you nailed it there. It comes and goes in seasons, and there's been many times where just because of God's goodness, I feel like I've been there personally, or our family has been there. But one that really stands out to me is probably stands out the most was when my wife and I were first in the process of moving up here. So we graduated Bible college, and that was just an emotional, spiritual high time. And family, many church members from our old church there were behind us and were sending us off and were honestly blessing us. And many of them financially, family members, different aunts and uncles were sending us, knowing that we're moving across the country, sending us off with gifts. And it was just a very emotionally and spiritually high time, as I mentioned. And then we were able to take kind of like a 2-week vacation in order to get up here, about 2 weeks there that we just spent enjoying different national parks and cities on the way up here. Kind of took our time to get up here, and that was very enjoyable. Then we get here and it's exciting, it's new, it's fresh and novel to be here. Excited just to see how God had brought us to this place where we're finally getting to serve and use all that we had learned in Bible college and begin using that. And of course, then the people that were here excited and were embracing us. So that was a wonderful time in our journey, and just that seemed like nothing could go wrong. God was just blessing, and there was no negative aspect to that season of life at all. It's just a wonderful time.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think on our end. I mean, that was even kind of a cloud nine for us. Like, man, the Oxes are moving up here.
Sure.
Can't wait to see how God's going to use them. You'd intern the previous summer, and then we're moving up with your new bride, and just an exciting time on both ends when it comes to that. Well, that's where Jacob was here, and just everything is going just well. He thought he had somehow sidestepped payday. He thought he had gotten out of this as far as, I tricked my brother, everything's great. It's forgotten. But God hadn't forgotten. And while Jacob enjoyed God's blessings in verses 1 through 14, I come to verses 15 and 30, and a good summary statement for this is Jacob met ill reaping. You've heard the phrase, you reap what you sow.
Sure.
And that's usually a negative connotation, not a positive one.
Yes.
Jacob is going to taste the bitter fruits of ill reaping. And so you pick up in verse 15 and notice what happens here. And just some of the subtlety in his uncle. And Laban said unto Jacob, because thou art my brother. Now, just a little explanation here. He's already said in verse 14, thou art my bone and my flesh. So in other words, this is, we're family, we're tight, you're like a brother to me.
Yes.
And so we're going to make that the basis for our relationship. And according to the culture of the day, you don't hire family members as hired hands. You just say, hey, because of our kin, we're going to take care of you and make sure this is just mutual, it's understood. No need to go into a major contract, a business deal. But notice how Laban, in a sense, insults this familial relationship. And he says, shouldst thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And so basically, it almost sounds flattering from our culture's perspective. But in this day, it was actually demotion.
Right.
Is actually saying, hey, I know you're my flesh, I know you're a brother, but I really view you as a hired hand. How much can I pay you here? And just trying to buy that out. So he's bargaining over esteeming the family relationship. And so here's Jacob thinking about it. It's almost like verse 16 and 17 is entering his mind's eye, just what he's observed. And it says, Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, in other words, not so much attractive, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. I mean, Jacob had seen that at the well that day. That's what motivated him to take that cap off that well.
Yes.
And Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. Man, you talk about love, Nathan. I mean, I wouldn't want to wait that long. I almost did, 4 years for Bethany, but before I finally got to tie the knot with her. We're still making up for lost time. But 7 years, man, that's almost double that time.
Yep.
I'll work 7 years to marry this attractive daughter that you have. Well, notice the subtlety and ambiguity in Laban in verse 19. He said, it is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. Notice, he doesn't give a timeline. He doesn't specify 7 years. He doesn't mention as far as what this is going to look like. He just says, he doesn't even actually commit to do it. He just says, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. How about you just hang out with me? Like, what can I get out of you here? And Jacob, man, he's just starry-eyed and Twitter-pated. In verse 20 it says, Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. And it just was a blur, like double speed. 7 years, just a few days. And it's time to finally tie the knot and make this official, and he's going to have a wife and start a family. Well, everything is still somewhat clicking along. There's some things going on behind the scenes. But as you get to verse 21, notice how the tables turn. Jacob said unto Laban, give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her. And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. Now we need to understand a couple things about the context here. When it says that Laban made a feast, Laban is not the most spiritual or religious guy, as we've already seen.
Right.
Feast means drinking.
Sure.
There's a lot of wine, alcoholic beverage. And so probably late that evening, everybody's intoxicated, including Jacob. And then, according to their culture, they would consummate marriage overnight in darkness. So between darkness and intoxication, Laban's going to capitalize on this. And notice what he does, beginning in verse 24. It says, and Laban gave unto his daughter, verse 23. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah and brought her to him, and he went unto her. And verse 24, and Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah, his maid, for an handmaid. So Jacob is still clueless what's going on in verse 25. And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And he said unto Laban, what is this thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve with thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me? Now a couple things about the context and the words that he uses here. By using, in the context, Jacob has probably experienced a hangover. He wakes up grumpy to begin with.
Sure.
So that doesn't help him when he realizes this ain't the good looking one.
Wow.
And so he's on a hangover. He sees the less attractive one, and he's frustrated. He's worked 7 years. He's disappointed. And he storms into Laban and says, why have you beguiled me? Now, this is an interesting word that he uses, because this is the same Hebrew word that Moses wrote to describe Jacob's trickery of Esau back in chapter 27, verse 35.
Yes.
He's eating his own words.
Yes. Yep.
And it's coming back to bite him already.
Wow.
This is very intentional by the writer here. And it says, and notice how Laban just plays it off in verse 26. It must not be so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Now he's playing the card of self-righteous, like, well, I need to stick with our culture. I'm going to practice. I'm going to fall in line with culture, family tree here,
right,
and just fit with this. And so he's a hypocrite,
yes,
playing this self-righteous card.
Yes.
And he goes on and says in verse 27, fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. Now, if I'm in Jacob, at this point, how would you be feeling if you were Jacob?
Boy, I don't even know. That obviously betrayed, frustrated, furious. That's crazy situation.
And plus, you're on detox, right?
Well, not me, but
no. I mean, using your imagination.
Yeah.
Now, Nathan has not been drinking or anything, just to be clear. But and so we're putting ourselves in Jacob's shoes. Man, this is frustrating.
Yeah.
And what astounds me about this is in verse 28, Jacob's response. He doesn't argue. He doesn't fight. It says, and Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. And he gave him Rachel, his daughter, to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her handmaid. And he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. So total 14 years, and he has 2 wives. And of course, if you read on the text, you find the chaos that follows. But here's the point that I want to see. Based on Jacob's encounter with God, even though there's a lot of carnality in this section of Scripture, there's something about Jacob between the love he has for Rachel and the encounter that he had with God, knowing that, okay, God must be sovereign here. And plus, this woman is beautiful. I still want to fulfill my dues and marry Rachel. Between the mix of spirituality, God's sovereignty, and just the sheer male passion combined, he says, I'll submit. I'll work with you another 7 years. So as I look at this, what is God doing? And what comes to my mind is Galatians 6. Nathan, have you heard of the law of the farm? The law of sowing and reaping is what we hear it. And you reap what you sow. I've already mentioned that. God operates by the law. Now, I don't want you to think that God confines himself to a box. No. He made the box.
Right.
So if he designed the box, he can operate through that box, the law of sowing and reaping. We get that from Galatians chapter 6, verses 7 and 8. He wrote, or the Apostle Paul wrote, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to the flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting." Now let's think about this just for a moment. Do you remember, have you ever observed just in life in general, maybe even in your own life, just some ill reaping? I mean, have you observed that firsthand, how people have maybe sown a certain way and then reap the ill fruits of that sowing?
Absolutely. Probably the first realm of life that comes to my mind with that is just financial. I mean, you reap wisely, you save, you make wise investments with your finances. You're not you don't spend it all, and that's gonna come back and be good for you. But if you spend it all, you overspend, you spend more than what you have, you go into debt, then eventually that's gonna come back and bite you. It's like that boomerang. It's going to come back and get you.
Yeah, finance is a big one. And there'd be so many different areas, and we'll cover a few more here in a moment. But I look at this and I ask the question, Nathan. I just say, what is God doing through ill reaping with his people? I mean, like, is he mad at his people? Is he angry with his people? Is he being vindictive? Like, man, I'm gonna teach you a lesson, put you in your place because of the mistake that you made. Lightning bolt. But I think the New Testament shines some light on this as far as the heart of God.
Yes.
And my mind goes to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11. And the writer, inspired by God, says, "Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous."
Right.
So in other words, when I reap the ill fruits of poor sowing, it's no fun. It's grievous. But he goes on and says, "Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby." So what is God trying to do through ill reaping in Jacob and you and me? He's chastening us. He's disciplining us. Let me use modern terminology. He's spanking us for the fruit.
Absolutely.
Now let's put ourselves in Jacob's shoes for a moment. At this point, he's feeling kind of fruitful. In other words, hey, I met with God. I saw this ladder going up to heaven. This angel's going up and coming down. And I'm tight with God. Things are good. But man, when it comes to anything else, I think I've arrived. I think I'm good. God says, no. There's deeper fruit.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes we think we've learned lessons. Have you ever felt that way, Nathan? I've got the lesson learned, and then there's more chastening that comes to kind of deepen further lessons.
Yeah.
And we see this going on in Jacob's life, but we need to understand something, that God does this because he loves us. New Testament style here. Now I realize Old Testament, you don't necessarily see that in this story, but you relate this to where our context is now. God uses ill reaping to chasten us, to deepen our fruitfulness. But here's the frustration, and let's think this out for a moment, Nathan. The challenge in this whole scenario isn't Jacob. The challenge is Laban. Because God is using a crook to chasten him. Right. I mean, let's think this through a little bit as far as the crook that Laban is and how frustrating this must have been for Jacob. First of all, he insulted Jacob by saying, "Oh, you're my blood, you're my kindred. Oh, I'll pay you as a hired hand." And then he uses his own daughters as bargaining power. Wow. I mean, like a cow and a sheep. Wow. And says, "Okay, here you go. Here's you work for me for 14 years. I'll give you a cow." I mean, that's almost what he's saying here. Bargaining power with his two daughters. Yep. And then the hypocrisy say, "Well, it's not that custom in our land." I mean, he's a hypocrite. Yep. Just displaying himself as self-righteous. That's frustrating, and that's who God uses to spank us. hypocrites, jerks. And so when that is going on, I mean, Nathan, what is the natural way to respond to God using these jerks in our life? I mean, this ill reaping. I mean, have you been down this road? Have you seen this happen before?
Sure, yeah. I think probably the natural response is just to ask God, what are you doing here? Why are you doing this to me? Point the finger back at Him and act like we're the victims here. Act like we're the victims.
Yeah, victimism.
Yes.
Man, it's so easy to point out the fault in the other guy.
Yes.
The jerk that God's using.
Yes. Yep.
and miss what God has for us through this. And Jacob could have done that, but God's not done. Just working in him to bear more fruit, and we're going to find in Genesis 32 that he gets in a wrestling match with an angel of God, and that fruit deepens, and it's affecting his hip, and he's a cripple the rest of his life. And I don't want to steal my thunder in future weeks, but God is dealing with him.
He is.
But the point I want to see in all this is God chastened him out of love, using ill reaping for further fruit. Yes. And there's going to be further fruitfulness in Jacob's life. There's further fruit in my life and your life because of ill reaping sometimes and chastening that goes on. So the question that we need to ask, and as we just round the last curve of the straightaway, is simply this: what difference does this make? I mean, how does that help you and me come this week? I mean, as we're navigating the COVID-19 and trying to discern, how seriously to take all these warnings and what our response should be, I think we always need to look at the present tense. And here's the first takeaway from this: be careful how we sow.
Yes, absolutely. Be
careful how we sow. One thought comes to my mind: if we respond with anger through this COVID-19, and we get angry, we don't like the way the government's handling it, or we are just shaking our fists, we're constantly complaining and lighting up social media, Facebook, Instagram, with these comments on how much we hate the decisions being made, and we're sowing bitterness. I mean, that's going to come back and bite us.
Yes.
And so just be careful how we sow through this, the attitude that we display. I mean, if we exhibit that attitude in front of our kids, man, our kids are going to come back and they're going to exhibit it too.
Yes.
And man, I've been convicted at times, maybe a comment I made to my kids, and I maybe sowed something I shouldn't have, and I hear them telling somebody else, I'm like, whoa, they heard that from their dad. I mean, you've got to be careful as far as the things that maybe come out. So be careful how we sow. Here's another aspect that slips in on how being careful how we sow. I think if we're not careful, we can fall prey to exceptionalism. Like, I'm the exception. Like, it's not going to come back and bite me. But going back to Galatians chapter 6, Paul wrote, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked." God doesn't make exceptions. And none of us are above this law of sowing and reaping. So the second take home from this is not just beware of how you sow, but respond tenderly to the reaping. And this is bigger, I mean, this is a greater challenge than even sowing the right way sometimes. Because you had mentioned victimism. And, man, I do this and this is what I get.
Yes.
Self-pity and victimism.
Yep.
But I think there's another natural response in this, Brother Nathan. That's bitterness. We start shaking our fist. I mean, we get mad at Laban.
Right.
That jerk that God's using to work that deeper fruit. And a couple things that come to my mind. I think of our parents with teenagers. I have a couple. It's easy when our teenagers maybe make an unwise decision or have a season of rebellion, that parents immediately point the finger at their teenager and say, that we don't want to cuss or anything like that, but sometimes we start thinking some not so nice terms. And we look at our teenagers and we say, man, if that kid would just get it. And we point the finger like it's a teenager's fault. Well, he might be making a poor decision.
Sure.
But mom and dad got to look in the mirror and think, okay, is there some this is ill reaping. I mean, did I sow this?
Yes.
Let me start with dad here. Let me start with mom. And see how I can navigate this differently with maybe the younger siblings, or even sow the right way with this teenagers. Not too late, he's still in my home or she's still in my home. And so I think parenting and those rebellious stages are just a reminder we need to respond tenderly to reaping. Then also, you mentioned debt. Man, that's a big one.
Yes.
And I don't want to repeat what you said, but man, that you smacked out of the park with that example there. But I think of some of our families, they're blended.
Yes.
In other words, stepmom, stepdad, stepchildren, stepson, stepdaughter. And obviously that would be ill reaping for poor decisions made in the past, maybe in a past life, before they were walking with God, poor decision at some point. And my heart goes out to the blended families in our church. And I'm sure thankful for all of our families. But what catches me about some of our blended families is this, that through that ill reaping of stepchildren and the challenging difficulties of that, I think that ill reaping can actually deepen their faith in a way if they respond the right way to it.
Yes.
Maybe you and me, because we're not in blended families, Nathan, but they can experience some deeper fruit and some usability that others, such as you and me, couldn't experience.
Right.
And I hope that would be an encouragement to even the blended families that are checking in this evening, that don't shake your fist at your stepchildren.
Right.
Or some of you teenagers, you have a stepmom, stepdad, don't point your finger at the stepdad or the stepmom, but rather think, man, how can God deepen the fruit here?
That's good.
Through this season that I'm going through. And I really believe if we just respond tenderly to that reaping, the sky's the limit what God can do.
Yes.
Now, before we have a word of prayer, Brother Nathan, I just want to encourage everybody that's checking in, 2 simple things. Before you just check out tonight and start chewing the fat with your family, or go into another video or something along that line, go ahead and stop and discuss the questions that are posted below this video. And then I sent out to some of the hosts that are just leading some of the discussions and so forth. And men, if you're listening in, I encourage you to lead your family in some discussion right here. And then also, if maybe it's just a couple of friends hanging out, I encourage one of you just to lead this discussion and just ask the question, talk about it, to have that truth get a little stickier. And then secondly, once you've discussed those 3 to 4 questions that are listed below, take some time to pray. Pray for our nation. Pray for the people that are affected. Pray for the people that have lost loved ones through this.
Yes.
And then pray that God would give us wisdom on how we can be light through this season. I'm going to have a word of prayer, but as soon as I'm done praying, I'm going to look forward to seeing you Wednesday. We'll have yet another message in light of all that we have. And I'm going to talk specifically about the home. About how we can influence. This is just a meaningful time with our families because we're getting more time on the home front. And how can I make the most of those relationships with my spouse, with children that are still at home, my grandchildren. And so let's pray and then we'll conclude our time. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for what we've seen in Jacob's life. Help us to just correct our sowing and sow in the right way. And then when we do taste those bitter fruits of ill reaping, help us to respond tenderly to those lessons learned and navigate in a way that would just honor you. And God, keep our people close to you until we meet again on Wednesday. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.